Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super excited because we have the founder and creative director of Quality Beast, Dylan Cromwell, on the line. Say hello, Dylan.
Hey, what's up, y'all?
And so this is going to be an interesting video because what we're going to be talking about is Seize the Bean, a game of which, oh jeez, heavy game, that I have a copy of, but is noteworthy because this is a Kickstarter that delivered 3 years late. And so, and kudos to you for holding through and making it happen. But this video is really to talk about that experience as a creator, both in terms of what happened and like how we got there, or you got there, I didn't get there, but how you got there, and sort of dealing with it and working through it, because there are a significant number of creators that fall behind, run into troubles, the shipping, the printing, and there's something to be said for the creators that stick through it and eventually get through and deliver, of which you're in that category. So that's great. But so to start, I think, some folks might not be as familiar with Seize the Bean or Quality Beast. It's worth note that actually Quality Beast has also done localization and has localized a couple Pencil First games from my company in the German and Dutch markets. But where did you start? How did take us through getting to Seize the Bean and then go from there?
Yeah, sure. I've always had an entrepreneur background and worked in tech and had some successes with startups, especially in Berlin. And my wife said to me one day, when these companies get bought, there'll be an end to the party. What will you do next?
Right.
And we were thinking of having a family, and I wanted something that just was more wholesome than working, 80-hour weeks for a tech startup. And so I thought maybe I'll get into video games like yourself. But I realized quickly that industry was hard to get in from the side. So I decided I would try to release a game, and then releasing a video game turned into releasing a board game. And then the idea for Seize the Bean was born, mostly just as a side hobby to do while I had a job.
And so, Seize the Bean is a pretty dense, robust, big game. Yes. I just, again, from picking up and knowing the components. But so, did you do the entire design on your own? And that, what was the creation? You have it's created by Dylan. So what's the sort of story there? How did the actual game come to fruition?
Yeah, I think my best skill is being a producer, meaning that I can do many different talents, but I really push the energy of a project. And so when I played Trickerion from Mind Clash Games, I was super inspired by how mechanically sound it was, but how much the mechanics were dripping with theme. I was just blown away by that. As someone that also just loves products, like well-made products, it just inspired me so much. And I think you'll see a lot of DNA of games like that, like these kind of like bigger, denser Euros, but with thematic vibes in Seize the Bean. But I quickly realized when I started designing that I was not sound enough mechanically on my own to tackle that and pay homage to the game's inspiration, which is the city of Berlin, shrouded in this idea of a coffee game when it's not really about coffee. So I brought on a co-designer that I met at the first Spiel I went to in 2016, Andy Couch. And we also have a co-creator, Josh Wilson, who was there from the beginning, but not in charge of mechanics, more helping with world building. And then, of course, we have the artist too, Mario Fernandez Garcia Pulgar, and kind of the four of us.
There's a lot of art in there. It's incredible looking.
Yeah, the four of us were like a really interactive team. So there was a lot of game design happening because of Mario's art, which is kind of chaotic, but also really integrated. I really like when the art can inspire the game mechanics. And that's a hard, back and forth to set up. But
for sure,
that kind of explains the chorus team. But there's a lot of other people that work on it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And thank you. And and you all bring it together. And this is like, a pretty successful, a very successful first campaign. 3,000 plus backers. Yeah. It's in euros. It's 137,000 euros, which with today's rate to dollars is about $137,000 actually. Yeah. But maybe at the time it was a little bit more. But so So you have this incredible campaign and a campaign with like a lot of, a little bit of what I would consider like over the top stretch goals. But
Totally.
setting that aside, you have this campaign, you have this, it funds in 48 hours, like a big success out of the gate. And then so like what went wrong? Like what happened such that your 2018 date became a 2021 date?
Kind of a lot of things. Most of them due to me just doing things without knowing what I'm doing. So my advice to anybody out there who's listening to this is take the scope and bring it way down. And that's one of my biggest flaws is having really big ambition. And in the tech world and the startup world, I'm able to do things and I'm able to follow up with my ambition. And it was the first time making a board game. I had honestly no idea what I was in the store for. And we had also no idea that it would fund like that. No idea. And if I think back to the time, my co-designer had told me, all of the content, by the way, for the stretch goals was planned. That's how a lot of stretch goals work.
Sure.
But he had still said, this is way too many expansions for an initial release. And I had said, I know, but this is my vision. And to this day, I stand by that. I love it when even people like yourself got the game, opened it up, and they're like, whoa, there's a whole city in here. It's like, that's what I wanted. And I'm seeing some of our community actually play through all of the expansion content and finding that value I wanted there. But did it need to be done that way? No. So that's the start of what went wrong. And then I've also never planned. Yeah.
Well, can we tease that out a little bit? I mean,
sure,
because I think it'll be useful for folks who are listening. So, like where are the categories? Like it's one thing to say I haven't done, a game before and tried to do a lot, but like, what are some of the specific things that you either misjudged or underestimated? Like a commonplace, even though things were planned, like was all of the development design work complete prior to the Kickstarter, or was there still ongoing? Like, was it print ready upon funding, or was there different? No. That's a place where something sometimes spirals out of control.
There's three areas that are really easy to target. One, we can just go ahead and put me on the spot. One is just, honestly, I should have done this better. It's not that hard to do. I didn't do an art test and go, oh, this is how long it takes to draw each card, and then map that out. Well, it's just stupid. Like, and that's anybody out there, just don't do it. Just do a test. The second thing, which is a lot harder to foresee.
And so that is to say, you discovered that even though you had budgeted the cost of all the development, that the time to complete was just not in scale with what you expected.
Of just the art, because it was like 600 cards for Mario to do. And we have a really close art. I give art direction. He does cards. We do feedback. So I didn't even recognize how much of my time the art direction that we do together, but would take. The second thing though, which is much harder to map out, was we had planned and of course designed these expansions. They had been played, but they hadn't been played well enough to release them to thousands of people. And I'm the type of person that isn't going to release something that I don't think stands up. I mean, the reason why we were called Quality Beast is because I do care a lot about the quality of the game production, but also the quality of the mechanics. And so we started, doing the after campaign development, and we had to scrap, I think 20 of the 23 groups almost entirely, and then redesign and develop them. And that was huge. And the momentum going through that with having to announce delays, it's hard. That's hard as a creator. The third thing, which is weird to say out loud, but we really cared about the accessibility and the professionalism of the rulebook. And I'm not saying it's a perfect rulebook, but I think most people's reaction to it is like, wow, okay, they know what they're doing, which we didn't. And we achieved that result at the end because we went through so many iterations, and that took months. And now the product designer that I work with, Ava, she can slam out a rulebook in way less time, with way less help. But it was our first time, so it was a grind. We that kind of hit us like a ton of bricks. We thought it was going to be like a couple weeks and the rulebook's done, and that's just naive. But I think a lot of first-time creators wouldn't see that coming. And also the rulebook is 36 pages, and the expansion rulebook is 56 pages, and we laid out 5 languages internally. So that's 460 pages of layout we did.
Oh no, I mean it's a crazy amount of work, and I I think these are all three really good categories that I think I
Yeah.
want to play back just a little bit, and some of this maps to like what would be how you'd consider, is more common in video game development, but certainly appropriate for board game development, which is, essentially a lot of people, it depends on where you are, but move into a Kickstarter effectively what would be in a pre-production phase that's now being unlocked or gated into a production phase. Pencil First Games at this point, actually, we don't typically do a Kickstarter unless we're like most of the way through production, but that's just because I don't like having any, I like minimizing unknowns after having done this as many times. But the key thing about a pre-production phase is that you want to, like, when you're going into production, it needs to just be the work, and you want to understand the work requirements, the time it takes, the scope of the work, the time it takes to complete the work.
Exactly.
And then on the design side, you want to mitigate design risk, know-how, playtesting, development, such that when you come out the other side, if you have a schedule, with a good amount of certainty that that's actually the effort, the people needed, the budget needed, and the time needed. And I think in your example is a great example, which I've seen lots of times. It's just not that simple but not always done thing, which is like, hey, and it's not always about development time. Sometimes it's about quality or target, which is like, hey, we need to have a representative image, a final version of each element of the game, right? Like, I don't need 600 cards, but I want to have made 2 or 3 that are approved at the target quality, etc. So I know what that production track is, or this track or that track, and that gives you some sense of experience. So I think that's a really good call out that you've made, for sure. The redesigning stuff comes up a lot, and that's another reason I think creators sometimes, a backer makes a suggestion that they take on, or a feature, or solo mode, and it's like, well, those aren't like instant things; those take a lot of work. And even from a Pencil First Games perspective, we Delicious, which is an upcoming title of ours,
which is awesome, by the way.
Oh, thank you. But actually, we went through we skipped Kickstarter on it, which is a whole other topic, but we went through the process of making the rule book, and then I was doing some playtesting, or somebody was doing some playtesting, and we were running into some really key confusion. And we had spent a lot of time on the rule book and a lot of iteration and blind testing and that. But ultimately we determined that there was some language and information clarity that needed to be added, which was like not overhaul, but like a rewrite of a lot of the rule book, and then actually impacted the visual of the key. It's a pen and paper game, and redoing some of the layout so that it was really clear, at least a couple components.
Totally.
And you look at those, it happens, but you look at, you're like, man, why are we here having to redo all of this now? Like, we should not have had to. But so, and then your third category, so and the rule book. I think just, again, the rule book in general is, especially if you want to do it well, right? Like, if you don't really care about how you're doing it, it's not that much work. But
if you're writing rules for like 23 different, abilities, cards, and you want them to be understandable, and then they're changing, and then you're updating diagrams.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You're trying to do examples. Like, the reason our rule books are so many pages is also just because we have tons of examples. And I had a lot of debates about this with the team early on. I was like, forget examples, and they were like, Dylan, we need examples. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And actually, Roman from One More Time Games worked on an early version of the rulebook, and he really won that discussion with me. So thank you, Roman. I look up to him a lot. He's like, you need examples. Like,
and if you're not using Illustrator, or even Photoshop, but with reference images, going through and having to update a rulebook is deadly. Really being able to at least make it so that when you fix a card, you can re-export and the card gets fixed on the 15 pages it appears on is like a very important part of the process. One question I had, you mentioned the Loke work. Yeah. Was that part of the Kickstarter? In other words, were you offering versions in different languages from the get-go?
Totally. Yeah, it was totally ridiculous. And so
who suggested that to you? I mean, I guess you're based in... I mean, it's based on Berlin, so it's probably a German and English, but like, why all the other?
The issue comes from like how connected I want to be to the community, and how transparent, and how I probably want to please too many people, but I also want to really listen. And so, I love all of our backers, really, but I think I felt kind of pressured to launch that Kickstarter when we did, because I remember going to Spiel. I guess it would have been the second time in a row. and we had already been to half a dozen events. And I think people were saying sort of like, oh, showing the game again. And I don't think they meant it in a negative way, but it made me feel sort of like a peer pressure. Why haven't you launched this yet? And of course, I've learned that I can take control of that by maybe don't show the game until you're really ready to start a promotional track. But I didn't realize that at the time, right? So we had all of these things, localizations, but also solo mode and tons of other things. The whole resin snack pack, like all of these things were suggestions from backers. The milk carton deck boxes that happened during the campaign. I mean, I designed the solo mode during the campaign, so that's pretty.
So those weren't even so. But,
irresponsible.
Okay, but, so were those weren't stretch goals? Those were just extra content that was suggested.
Yeah, totally. I just thought, you know what, I'm feeling wild. Let's go. But of course, I've learned, and I have an amazing team around me that has also helped to say, hey, it's cool that you have a big imagination. That's really good for creating games. That's really good for product. That's not really good for us, planning something realistically. So we're gonna like cut off your imagination in these spots, and I'm happy with that. That's kind of why I like being creative director and not like a managing director. And let's wrap up all those three topics into one big topic. I never had like a true business partner that was there helping me. And even though the industry is filled with really cool people, it's also filled with some suits. And I'm not going to name names, but I did have a couple people that it felt like were trying to get something out of the project from the beginning. And it made it a little bit hard to navigate being more of a creative type and less of I don't consider myself a business owner, right?
Right.
I never set out to own a business. I just wanted to make a game. And it's kind of wild, the journey it's taken me on.
Well, and I think there's also, separate from sort of people trying to leech, which is clearly there, I just see tons and tons of people providing awful advice to incoming and new creators on a regular basis. Totally. And it's just like, it's just like, this is awful advice. And not necessarily, like, sometimes advice is like good in like a certain slice of like, if this is advice for this person in this way, like that's appropriate. But like if you just apply that advice to somebody who doesn't have the perspective or the IP or whatever it is that
different contexts,
the context, it turns from good advice to terrible advice. It's
so I got a lot of that, and I recognized it, but I felt to be honest, I felt a little bit lost, and I was a little bit on a moving train because there was so much hype and belief in the game at these events. I mean, 2016, we went to Spiel with a terrible prototype, and everyone was like, "Wow, this game's amazing!" And that's where I met my co-designer, and he came back to my house, and he was like, "We have some work to do," and that's not exactly what he said, but it wasn't. So why were people so hyped about it? Ever since then, I've learned to take. Event attendees, I love you, but I've learned to take what you say with a grain of salt because you're just excited to be there with the team.
Okay, but so let's break this backwards in terms of so you've mentioned these three miscalculations, but like, was that 3 years or 1 year? Like, how did that fall into, like, does that encapsulate, like, yep, those are the three reasons we were delayed, or did you end up having other issues?
No, that was pretty much it. There's a couple of things where people try to bring up like how we did production, like sugar cubes or anything, but that's just more of a meme. Most of the production didn't delay things, and I'm not going to go back and read every update because we could probably improve the communication too. But what happened was the realization of these mistakes didn't happen at once. It was like, oh, there's an art problem. Okay, everybody, we have a delay. And then everybody being like, oh, really? And then us kind of like trying to like gulp that down, stay respectful, stay communicative, stay energetic. And then months later going, oh no, we have like another one. And this one's even bigger about development. Okay, everybody. And then everyone be like, what? Come on. And then by the third one, I think there was definitely some updates where people were saying, it's been months. How could you still be working on the rulebooks? And we're over here like, we don't know. Every day, it's so much work.
I think that whole communication piece of it is important. I actually want to spend some time talking about it, but I just want to clarify because also I guess because it's also been such a long period of time. But so what I'm hearing from you, and this isn't loaded in any way, but what I'm hearing from you is in terms of the issues that you see for Seize the Bean and the time associated, you are not in the category of maybe a Kickstarter that came out a year or two after you in saying, oh, well, actually, this was the pandemic, or actually, this was
No.
freight, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm just saying for
Yeah.
people listening, this is not a video about
No, we
those
delivered
problems.
during COVID, and we met. Like, this is important. Somebody should go back and check the update. I forget the number. When we finished creative, we'd been saying for years, when we finished creative work, the rest we can tell you realistically. And we started delivering to backers on the month we said from that update during COVID. That's like, I don't want an award for it. I'm just like, we got a lot of like comments about stop blaming COVID. And we were like, where did we do that? Like we did have some issues in the US with COVID and freight. It was pretty wild, but it wasn't boats on the water. It was boats stuck in ports at the US. It was super weird. But yeah, all of our problems were like Dylan caused. They were.
Well, sure. Well, I mean, I think I think that's important. And would you say, just curious, ultimately, we're like, so just, I want to get back to that backer communication portion, but
Yeah.
how big of an impact were things like financially, right? There's a couple key things that are happening during this period. One, maybe you had the art production mapped out and budgeted, but, whether it's your time or other people's time, when things stretch out over time, every people may be working for back end or not being paid or whatever. I mean, like there's different versions, but usually it means there's an increase in cost if it's going over a longer window of time. And then also that was a time when the tail end of it, when you're getting into fulfillment, some of those prices are starting to escalate in the marketplace. So,
Yes. Yes.
Was there a time when the game
Delayed because of money?
well, not delayed because of money, but you didn't say that, but I guess that's a fine question. Did it ever get delayed because of money? But more important, did it go from a success? Did you end up having to fulfill basically with a lot of additional expense on your part, which wasn't covered by the Kickstarter? So you basically ate all of this extra cost that sort of fell out of all this.
Yeah, sure. Like Seize the Bean's second printing or second edition, we've now gotten to the point where I can say that there can be a viable product for distribution and retail. But the current Seize the Bean, this Seize the Bean, there's no way that after all of that, and also just simply the way that I priced it, since again, I'm not the business guy and I was learning at the time, it's not a product to build a company around. Now, it might be a product to show we know how to make a product from a product point of view, but not from a business point of view.
Oh,
we
yeah,
had no delays
because you have this price that you on the Kickstarter at least, this was €39, and then you were like, this is a $5 discount off of the retail price of 45.
And retail ended up being 55 euros, and what the team did was, shout out to Killian, who does a lot of number crunching, that found a price point that was reasonable for us to make sure that people can still get it at a good price, and we're not just totally eating everything, and would allow us a nice transition to what will be the MSRP of the second edition, which should be close to about that. But it will just some modified contents.
Just as a general, from my perspective, holding this in my hand, it's like a slightly smaller box, but this feels like this is a $60 game that's the weight of an $89 game. This is what? How much does this weigh? 8 pounds? Or am I just?
I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah,
maybe not that heavy. But this is a real. This is also going to be expensive to ship, right?
Yeah. So, but it's important to talk about that. I know sometimes money topics are private or taboo. I'm not afraid to say that money has been it's been hard. I didn't intend to run a board game business, and one thing we didn't touch on was why did I transition to do full time? And I had a child, and then had basically lost a job, kind of back to back, right after the campaign succeeded, and there was sort of like a question of, okay, should I give this a spin? And when I look back now, I realize, especially when I look at someone like you who has their job and runs their jobby, as you call Pencil Purse Games, and you did once to me. And I admire that a lot. And I think that would have been a smarter decision, but it's not what I did. And I think that didn't help. But there was no team member who stopped working because of a money topic, or there wasn't like a delay at the factory because of money. We have amazing partners that have put a lot of trust in us, an amazing team, and we've had a lot of luck too. So I wouldn't tell anybody else to do it this way.
Sure,
it was nerve-wracking, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've sort of covered off on what happened, and I think it's important that, I mean, I don't know if you want to, I mean, ultimately you can take all responsibility, but like talking about it as like, no, this was like development, decision making, production, not like, oh, the printers had a COVID lockdown for 9 months and we couldn't solve it.
No.
And then
this game wouldn't have happened without Joe Wiggins. There's a lot of people shout out, they're in the rule book, but like with him, when he was at Panda Manufacturing, this game would not exist without him at all. Like, he's a board game god, basically. Like,
and so
huge.
Awesome. But just in terms of the backer communication, right? Like, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's like blazed into your brain, but like, how would you, like, in retrospect, not saying I wish we just knew everything up front or we wish there wasn't surprises, like, what are maybe a couple things you think you did well with backer communication? Yeah. And maybe what were some things you were like, we should, if you're in this situation, I would recommend XYZ, which we did not do well.
Yeah. Honesty. We were always honest. I know we didn't always say things clearly, so that led to some people going, wait a minute, this doesn't add up to what you said before. It's like, it's bad communication. And we were almost always present. I'm not sure what to say. Like, I'm not saying we sent an update every single month, but we sent tons of updates. And when we would get overwhelmed in email or in Kickstarter messages, we would try to be available in other ways. So we never ghosted at all.
So these are the things that you're saying you did well was honesty and staying regular-ish updates and communicating. Yeah,
which is hard. Any creator out there who gets into a tough situation, I feel for you. Like, if you're not ready for thousands of people to be waiting on you, it's going to be hard emotionally to get through. And then I think the third thing is, and I love this because when we delivered, I was like, okay, we delivered. That's it. I'm happy. But there was like a podcast, and I've heard this more than once, where somebody said, worth the wait. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that those words came out of someone's mouth, because that's a long wait. Sure. And I don't think I'm like, Vitel Lacerda over here or something, like, it's like, we just wanted to make a game. So I think the fact that it's landing and that it's still tracking quite well on Board Game Geek, we're sold out in Germany. We're getting pressured really hard to reprint German, at least, and we're rapidly selling out in all other regions. Like, I think this is what I'm saying creators should do. Deliver on what you promise. If you're saying this is going to take so long because we're doing something really good, we have a strong vision, even if you get flack for it, at least do that,
Sure.
And I think we did that to enough of a percentage that it was like, okay.
Well, I mean, whether or not folks love every aspect of the game and that piece, I mean, there's no doubt just getting it and seeing it that it contains the contents as promised.
Yeah, totally. And more. I mean, there's more in there than we promised too, because we felt bad. So we were like, we put a little more in.
Right. I think that's good advice, right? I think that's, ultimately just assuming, like, if you're going to go through the process of having all these people hanging on you and being late and all that, make sure that you get to the end of the line and deliver something that sort of, makes up for it, for lack of a better way of saying it.
You also asked what did I do bad though?
Oh yeah, okay. So what? Well, I guess those are the three good things. Okay, what do you think you didn't do well?
Can we get a bit vulnerable on here? Is this a safe space? So I didn't know something about myself that I now know, thanks to our next title, Philosophy. And it's a really important thing to know. And it's that I'm autistic, and I'm a high-functioning autist, and I've been masking it my entire life and stumbling through communication. And even my early communication with you as a localization partner, I look back on it now and I realize, like, I didn't read so many social cues and so many basics.
Sure.
And I'm not blaming anything on that, but it has been an obstacle for me. And I noticed that a lot of partners and people around me say, hey, you're too wordy. You write huge emails. And I go back and I look at a lot of the updates that were confusing, and the same thing was happening. And I think what I'm saying from this is find out things that are your flaws. And I'm not saying autism is a flaw, but what it created was often bad communication if I was the only one writing those updates and if no one was editing them. And then later on, we had different team members. A huge shout out to Tabea, since she's the main one, who was really helping to either write updates or edit them or even just back and forth with me. Don't say that. Like, nobody cares about that. And again, I don't want to blame being autistic, but since I found that out, I realized how often it makes it hard for me to be understood or hard for me to understand others. And I even go back and look at the comments during the Kickstarter, and there were times where I would be responding to somebody and I'd get sort of like a defensive response back from them, and I'd be like, oh, why is there emotion now? And then people would tell me, yeah, because look at the way you respond. And it didn't add up to me, you know? So I think I would tell people, like, no matter if you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, it doesn't matter, but have somebody check your language, have somebody check your understandability, and make sure there's someone who's not afraid to like bark at you. That's what's cool about Tabea. She literally will be like, Dylan, get out of here. Like, and that's important. Don't have someone who's like your big fan come and say, oh yeah, everything's good, you know? Because often people who are backing a project, they won't tell you they don't understand. They'll be like, this is kind of long. I'm not really going to read it. I mean, for sure. Thing we did wrong, and that I need to improve on, you know? And that's hard. I'm so passionate. I want to answer every question. I want to talk to everybody, and I'm so hyped that I sit there and I write out like paragraphs. You know,
yeah, I mean,
it comes across wrong.
It's absolutely critical as an individual, if as you are growing and changing and learning, right, to be able to pay attention to and learn about what you're good at and what you're bad at, like what your superpowers are and what your super weaknesses are, and you know, whether it's autism or whether it's just you have a rage problem, right? Like there's different, not that those are equivalents, but like, you know, like whatever's your personality, like some people like in, you know, I again, not going to start naming people, but they're like people who are like, hey man, you really just, you clearly don't do this well. Why don't you have somebody else? What are you gaining from you doing this? Yeah. And you know, both of us have a production background, but like fundamentally, and I think it's especially true when you like, I think there are certain skill sets and certain things that people feel like everyone can be good at. Like, I don't know, like whether it's writing or communicating, that seems like a generalist everybody skill. But like if you're making video games or complex project management, you're like, yeah, I'm not an architect, or like, I'm not a this fantastic alien. So you get used to the idea that there are just people who are way better than you at everything. And so I, as a person, for myself, I've just come to accept that basically everyone's better than me at just about everything. And if I can find somebody better than me at something, let them do it. Like, there's nothing I need to do. That's what makes you a good
project manager, though. You know, that's what I look up to you, because you said once in a call with me, no, you said it in a YouTube video, and I asked you to call about it. You said, being good with timelines is you can just practice it. And that really opened up this whole thing in my head. Like, oh, I just haven't practiced this. And for me, I'm not afraid to let go of something. I'm just not used to it because I'm a professional glass blower. That's my background.
That's pretty. We just watched Blown Away season 3 like a week ago. That's pretty awesome. All right, as a total somebody who has zero overlap, I at least enjoy it.
They hit enough realism that I feel okay about it. But like coming from a really rich raw art background, like the last thing you ever think about is, oh, somebody else can do this better than me. Because you're a crafts person, you know? You're like, no, I'm going to hone I'm going to make 1,000 glass cups a day until I'm just a champion of it. So that's really hard to transition into like manager mode, which is what I think like you should do the first games, you know, being prepared before a Kickstarter, right?
I was having a call with an executive producer at a pretty large video game company, and she was sort of lamenting relatively new EP and sort of like the craziness and stress of every day coming in and fire and this and sort of coping with it. And it was like a ranging conversation. But one of the things I mentioned was sort of like, it doesn't feel like now, but like in a year, 2 years, 5 years, everything that's like stressing you out and giving you like, just like making your life hard right now, it'll be easy. Like you'll look back at what the challenges you face now, and they'll just be like your basic everyday, like table stakes, no problem whatsoever. And so it is really, a lot of these things is just about learning, understand, even getting good at running Kickstarters, right? and just doing them again and again. So I do think that overall concept of like figure out what you're good at, get support, certainly when it comes to communication, having people review and read. I mean, even, I did an update I did 2 updates. I did like a Sunset Overwater Pocket update, Sunset Overwater update about the Pocket Edition and something else. And like I misspelled Pocket in the title. And I did like 3 at once. And Jessica, who would be the person who would normally be like looking this over, I don't know, was like,
"Hey, Team Awesome, who came up with that? Was that you?"
Team Awesome's from the original. That's me.
Sounds
But like but anyway, and like it's just a person who would have looked at it, and I don't know, it was the weekend, and it was 9 p.m. and I like mistyped in the title, and like so one Kickstarter's annoying because they're like, oh, you can't edit it. I like then watched a show and the half hour passed, and they're like, that's burnt in forever. But then then you also then even have the backer who's like, you can't even get the title spelled right in your
It's like,
but
this is a typo,
But it's just a good example that it really is valuable to have people look at your stuff.
The two other bad things. Just to
I'm glad you're like, Ed, stay on topic.
Well, one is the timeline thing we just talked about. I should have practiced timelines. In any way, I say this to everybody out there. You can practice timeline like with your family, like planning like a family outing, or you could do the thing that I didn't do, which is you could just release a simple game first. And the third thing, and this one's hard to admit being a founder of a company, but I'm not that passionate about like pricing things. It kind of scares me because as soon as I set the accurate price, I'm like, oh, but then people don't want to buy it. Like, so it's a little hard for me to value my own work. And I think that would have been better to have priced it correctly because it would have put me more into sustainability line of thought. I wasn't in any sort of like, how do I sustain this team? How do I, resources wise, even financially wise, just timeline wise. Like there's a lot of like reality that I think comes when you have so much work after a campaign. And so I've learned quite a lot about that. But what I've learned the most is, maybe I should find somebody.
Well, and you probably
better
would
doing
have,
this.
You probably would have had a higher outcome on your Kickstarter with 1,000 less backers, which is just so there's some interesting dynamics. I remember when I did Liftoff, my first campaign, and like I just fought. I remember this like distinct thing where I just fought for every backer, and we were going to stretch goals and breaking 50,000 and just like grinding like at some point, if you're going to put the effort in, you can go find people. Like if you're willing to like be on every channel, every place, and just like get out there and do the guerrilla marketing and the boots on the ground, you can get those backers. But what I came to realize was, and it's not specific to the backers, but like the effort to get the last $10,000 of lift, like created a ton of risk. It was like in some ways having not pushed that hard at the end would have been okay. Like it would have been okay to have a little fewer and not have pushed for that, because that last like created a bunch of things that ended up biting us on that campaign. So like sometimes it's okay. I mean, ultimately there's always different expectations for different Kickstarters based on X, Y, or Z. But from my perspective, like I don't. At some point, I'm just trying to phrase it right. Like you do a lot of Kickstarters. It's like, I don't need the next Kickstarter to be bigger than the last. Like I think a lot of Kickstarter creators are like, oh, my first Kickstarter was 20. I want my next one to be 40, and my next one was 40, so I want my next one to be 80. It's like, I have a title like Mall Peak, which has like a lot of upside. Not upside's not the right word, but like a certain type of audience and size and price point. And then I have something smaller like expansion for Diverging Paths and this art project with Hanafuda, right? And like sort of where like it's totally fine to have a Kickstarter that like they don't have to just be it exponentially more people and more growth, right? And I think it's easy to get caught up in that desire for more.
YouTubers say that now. There was an interview where Tommy Innit was saying, I think with Colin and Samir on the Colin and Samir show, you can't measure the success of a video just by its views on YouTube, because that's just a game. That's just an algorithmic game. You could have a super high quality video that just doesn't have a good thumbnail. And so that's kind of what you're saying with Kickstarters. Like you can have a really dope, really beautiful, really wonderful game that doesn't have this big splashy, thousands of backers. And I do think that that's kind of cool about our conversation, is because like I think you have found that spot where you're really just focused on the games. and not worried about like the glamour of like, oh, I launched these giant Kickstarters, look at me, which is cool.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, there's nothing to see here. The other thing I thought was also interesting, which is unique for folks who are coming into board gaming, with a video game or mobile game or whatever, price point isn't a component of cost. Yeah. Price point is a component of just marketplace and sort of how you're looking to scale your user base and your revenue and what model it's more of like a model, whether it's a subscription or free to play or a 99-cent app or whatever. The thing that's really amazingly challenging about making a physical retail product or physical product that's going into into effectively a supply chain and distribution chain is like the cost of making it, the components, it getting in, then the wholesale and all the different steps, people in it, and how you're selling it all ties then into, and then what's the value of the product just from like a size of the box, weight of the box, complexity of the game perspective.
Totally.
And that complexity of all those factors is not something you're going to have, like, that is just inherently not something you'd have experience with until you've experienced making a physical thing.
Totally, exactly. That caught me completely like off guard, especially when you talk about like viable for distribution, because the percentages you pay or that you receive, the discount that you give to distributors, not just to stores, cuts deeply into like what you sell it for. And I think a lot of people who buy games just kind of don't understand that. They don't need to, but I was one of those people who just buys games.
Yeah, certainly as a consumer, it's totally different than being a publisher. But so we've actually, I mean, I think this has been great. It's been pretty ranging. At some point in this conversation, you did mention philosophy and an upcoming Kickstarter. So you have gotten to the other, and actually somewhere in the middle, and I don't know where it was in our knowing each other, but I did a preview of Tower of the Sun.
Towers of the Sun.
Very, 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 very cool game. But this was like at some point, I have this graveyard of videos I've done for Kickstarter creators that like never got released, and every once in a while,
it's not the graveyard, it's in the icebox.
Icebox. Anyway, once in a while I reach out to folks like, hey, is it what's and basically at the time you're like, we've decided that we shouldn't do this until we've fulfilled and finished Seize the Bean and all that, which is totally an appropriate decision, by the way. But you've now fulfilled. Yes. Right. So are you smarter, better, faster, and back on Kickstarter, or what's your mentality going forward?
Yes. Okay. So the mentality is, whenever we go, we're ready to launch Towers, we stop and go, wait, are we really? The Towers base game has now been through enough core development that anything happening is like balance. Like, is there 25 or 22 crystals in the box? There's no changes to the core design systems. And if we noticed something, we would need to say, we're not changing. Sure. And say, second edition. There's a couple of potential small expansions or things that were in the base game that we thought weren't good to learn for a first-time player that are optional. And right now we're trying to either green light or red light those before the Kickstarter. And if something doesn't get green lit before the Kickstarter, it's automatically red lit, meaning it won't be part of it. We've already gotten quotes. It's distribution and retail viable from the quotes that we've seen. We haven't done like graphic design for the rulebook because we expect to get some feedback during the campaign, and that's okay. But you will see when a Kickstarter for Towers goes up, you will see a much longer timeline until delivery. That's from a level of text perspective, is much less. That's an abstract strategy game. It's much less. And even with the expansion stuff, it's nothing on the magnitude that Seize the Bean was. Right? I can actually just show a couple components just for fun for people that don't know the game.
You're creating these towers and you're moving guardians, legends, hero, whatever those are, gods around the board.
So we wanted to go to Kickstarter in September. We have announced a date, and that is overlapping with Spiel. And we've started to talk to press and the shipping times we're seeing to get press copies out, we're not 100% sure if the best time for that is like before and overlapping with Spiel, or if it might be better to move after. So I can't say anything about that because we're still discussing with the designer.
So then maybe I'm a little confused. So which is the next Kickstarter you're planning to do? Is it Tower of the Sun or Philosophy?
I'm getting that. So the reason why I talk about Towers first is because it's a true crowdfunded game, meaning we're going to bring it to crowdfunding where it's 80% done. We need to do some print file work afterwards. It's not just like fund and hit print. And that's okay. We feel okay about that. We've learned a lot. And I'll actually write up a blog post of all of the stuff that we talked about in this video and more about what we learned on Seize the Bean and what we're changing on Towers, because we know that it would help people to be able to read through that and get some confidence. However, in the meantime, we have a completely done game. I'm literally holding the pre-production copy. This is done. The English, the German rule books are done. The factory samples are done. There's nothing to do on this game. This is complete. We just need to hit print. So this is Philosophy. And we originally were going to take this direct to retail. And it was really hard to write the blog post that I wrote on BGG about it. But I needed to admit that if I learned anything about business ownership, it was don't take unnecessary large risks. And freight has just increased way too much. Cost of materials has increased way too much. And I just don't think that it's a smart decision to not run a sort of pre-order campaign, if you will. And people can look at that and say, oh, well, you're just going to a crowdfunding platform for reach. And they would be right. That's right. We're paying a percentage of our pre-order money that we would get for running a pre-order on our website to have wider reach. And we think that that is the right thing to do for the designer of the game and the artist of the game and the team. So we're actually running this one as soon as possible. And we're running it on GameFound. We'd like to test that platform. The reason Towers is going to Kickstarter is that, again, it's a true crowdfund campaign. And I know Kickstarter better because I did it before.
Sure.
And GameFound, one, we don't want to confuse anybody about what's going on. So we thought, okay, let's do a different platform so we can have a clear message. This is a pre-order campaign. This is a crowdfund campaign in the sense of what kind of work.
Well, yeah, I mean that seems to make sense because certainly, not that I'm in any way an expert on GameFound, but the idea of a pre-order is a little trickier, I think, on Kickstarter. It sounds like it's not as it's a little bit more common on GameFound, perhaps.
We also don't really like the state that Kickstarter's in right now. We're really excited about seeing what BackerKit does, and we're sort of undecided. So that's why we're trying different platforms. And this just felt like a cool opportunity to kind of run them back to back. So the only catch about the GameFound campaign is that since we never worked with them before, there was a little bit more hoops to jump through for things like business verification. It's totally fine. It's just taken like a week or two longer than we had hoped. And we're thinking, and we spoke with the designer actually this week, we're thinking it would be better to move that campaign to August 29th. So it was originally August 15th, so in about a week from Monday. And we decided let's give it a little bit more time to make sure that the campaign page is approved by GameFound.
Sure, you don't want to. Yeah, I mean that's all. It's all part of it, right? It's all part of learning and getting better at these at Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general is sort of, again, being willing to push or adjust dates or think about readiness, and resist the urge to just go because there's some idea that you need to go. And so I think that that's a general lesson or general thing crowdfunders should keep in mind is just like you don't never have to do anything. I mean, like there's consequences.
If you have external designers, you might contractually have to.
Okay, well don't be careful writing contracts that like force you to go to a market before you're ready.
No, but shout out to Galen Goodwick for being an awesome and really understanding designer for allowing us to like move things around. For his baby. So
it's interesting. Maybe sometimes we can compare contracts. Typically for the crowdfunding stuff, my contracts go so far as to say Kickstarter might not even happen and it might not fund. Right, like those are outcomes. But
maybe can I ask something to your audience?
Sure.
Maybe just
they might
in
not
the
respond. We'll
comments.
see if they got this far. But go ahead, ask away.
Okay, do y'all want to see us open source our designer contracts? Because I think what Jamie did over at Stone Mountain Games, he wrote a blog post about their contract but didn't release it. And I spent a lot of years, literally years, putting together a contract that balanced between the publisher and the designer well. And I was thinking maybe it'd be cool to open source it to the board game community, but I'd have to talk to our lawyer about that.
Yeah, so I can answer this question.
Yeah.
The interest in the broad gaming space for template contracts is through the roof.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like there's that many publishers, but like the amount of times I get asked for contracts is high. However,
so big yes, right?
However,
Oh,
well,
wait,
I'm saying
however.
I'm answering the interest. However, ultimately, contracts are never perfect, never complete,
Right.
never necessarily representing the type of business operations you want to run. They're all different. And so the reason I've never published, I mean, I'll give like planning sheets and other things, but the reason I've never been like, oh, here's a template contract for y'all to use is because like, I don't want to, like, I feel like it's inherently assuming responsibility where you're saying, oh, if you discover a problem with this, you can like get upset with me about providing a template that has a problem, right? And like potentially if it was actually provided, like you would need I almost feel like you would need a legal disclaimer in front of the contract that says,
Yeah.
I understand that in using this contract, I do not hold quality-based or Dylan or whomever responsible for any outcomes in any legal situation, right? That there might be, I wouldn't be surprised if in like general contract law, there's like a clause that already exists for the sanity of lawyers, but I'm not aware of it. So that's the reason I've hesitated a few times when
cool idea, but be careful, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a lawyer, you can look into it. Now, I mean, there's also interesting things where like German law is not the same as U.S. law, which is not the same as California, which is not the same as New York.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And there's some gotchas there, but I could at least tell you that the interest is there.
Okay.
Whether or not
we'll see. Let us know in the comments. Should I take a safer route like Ed's saying, or should we go Wild Dylan path?
Just put a disclaimer on it. Make it have a click through. But no, I do think the interest is there. There are actually some really good. I think the I'm feel bad for not remembering their site, but the guy they have like the
Cardboard Edison.
Yeah, thank you, Cardboard Edison. Thank you. See, who has some really good digests on like the types of terms that you might see in a contract.
Totally. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I thought. Maybe even providing it to someone like that so that they can do the disclaimer.
But so listen, we've been on for a good 50 minutes. I thought this was fascinating, and certainly I think for folks who are perhaps in the situation or feel themselves teetering into it or leading into a Kickstarter, some really great information in here. And so, I guess upcoming, just in sort of like news from Quality Beast, philosophy is going to be on
I believe
GameFound.
we'll make an official announcement by the time this video drops, but August 29th on GameFound, and it's basically a pre-order campaign. As soon as the campaign is over, we're going to push print. And then we won't have anything to do, which is why we'll then be preparing Towers of the Sun, which will announce if the Kickstarter is moving or not. We just want to give it the appropriate space, and it might be better to not have it overlap spiel, but we'll see what the designer, Stefan Brackman, says about that, because he's the boss.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for being on, and thanks so much for your openness and honesty. I think it's super, super great.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed. And thanks for everybody out there who back Seize the Bean and stayed with us through that journey.
Absolutely.
Love you
Absolutely.
all.
And thanks for watching. Bye.
Ciao.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.